Welcome to Tomversations, a monthly conversation with me, your host, Tom Hollingsworth, the networking nerd, on a variety of interesting enterprise IT topics. I wanted to talk a little bit today about wireless technology because it's been a very hot topic as we think about the way that we do work in the modern world. And I wanted to touch on Wi-Fi 6E, an emerging technology that has the potential to change the way that we do things, but it also has the potential to be a colossal disaster. So let's have a conversation about that. Now, before we get started, I do want to make sure that I define some terminology so that everybody out there understands what I'm talking about, because I do tend to use some terminology interchangeably. Sometimes I will refer to standards such as 802.11ac and 802.11ax, along with spectrum bands 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and 6 gigahertz. I recorded a Tomversations episode all the way back on episode 2 talking about the different combinations of those bands and standards to produce marketing terms. The Wi-Fi Alliance has decided that in order to make things a little bit easier on product packaging, that they're going to standardize on a set of marketing terms. Wi-Fi 5 is 802.11 AC in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz spectrum bands. Wi-Fi 6 is 2.4 and 5 gigahertz spectrum, but the 802.11ax standard. Wi-Fi 6E, subject of this video, is 802.11ax, but in the 6 gigahertz spectrum band, the one that was recently opened by the FCC. All right, now that we got the vocab lesson out of the way, let's talk a little bit. So, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're kind of at an inflection point right now. We have a lot of devices that need to get connected, and we're starting to run out of resources. The available space that we need to connect these devices is basically exhausted at this point, and we really need to make a move to a new area, a new way of connecting things. But one of the problems that we've run into is we really need to have new hardware in order to take advantage of this, because it turns out that the new resource areas that are available don't work with our old hardware. Now, you've probably noticed that I've been a little bit cagey and not noticed any terminology references in that. And if you did, it's probably because you realized that I'm not just talking about Wi-Fi 6E. I'm also talking about another networking protocol that we've had for many decades, and that would be IPv6. IPv6 has been a topic of a lot of networking discussion, like I said, for over 25 years. The original RFCs that drafted it were written back in 1993 when we were projecting to run out of space in the current IPv4 addressing spectrum, if you will. And we've spent the last almost 30 years trying to get it adopted in a wide scale. And one of the problems that we ran into is, just like HD DVD and Betamax, IPv6 may be technically superior, but being technically superior doesn't in and of itself create the traction necessary for adoption. It was looked at as a hobby or as a geeky thing that people needed to enable. And as we started doing more and more things with the IPv4 addressing space to extend its life, IPv6 became less and less important. One of the reasons for that was the increased technical complexity needed to implement it alongside IPv4. In a perfect world, we would have recognized the need to increase the address space that we had. We would have run IPv6 alongside IPv4 for a short time in order to make everything work the way we expected it to. And then we would have simply turned off IPv4 at one time. And we would have been running on IPv6 20 years ago. Like I said, in a perfect world, that's how it would have worked. But we don't live in a perfect world. And one of the things that happened was IPv6 was never able to convince the decision makers and the policy implementers that it was easier to use or cheaper to implement. And so it kind of languished. In fact, it's languished for so long that the recent spate of adoption of IPv6 that's come up in, say, the last couple of years has absolutely nothing to do with the technical merits or the perfect complexity reduction of IPv6. If anything, the reason why we're starting to see more and more of it is because the United States federal government has mandated that IPv6 must be installed in all systems going forward, and they've set a deadline. So just like any other thing that we've done with technology over the years, it wasn't the elegance that made it work. It was the old stuffed shirts that said we have to do it. Now, Wi-Fi 6E, the 6 gigahertz implementation of Wi-Fi, is a very elegant technology. All of the research that I've done and all of the videos and blog posts that I've written about it makes me think that this is super cool, awesome technology. Just like IPv6 was a super cool, awesome addressing scheme. And being super cool in and of itself won't get you very far. Why do we really need Wi-Fi 6E? Well, if you listen to a lot of the people in the wireless community, they'll tell you that we've effectively run out of spectrum. The first to go was the 2.4 gigahertz band, the original 802.11b and G that we used for so many years. It had very few channels and very small available bandwidth, as I mentioned in episode 2. But do you know who still uses 2.4 gigahertz almost exclusively? IoT manufacturers. Yeah, that's right. Your thermostat, your light bulbs, all of that smart home automation stuff that you've spent years assembling together using a variety of other standards that are not necessarily Wi-Fi related, it still communicates over 2.4 gigahertz. Well, why is that? Well, there are some technical reasons, such as being able to penetrate walls with a wider beam width. But in reality, it's because 2.4 gigahertz has been around for so long that we can make radios dirt cheap. And when you think about the complexity required to integrate new radios into a package that's already very small and likely to be running on a very low power, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make that jump. Adding 5 gigahertz connectivity to my doorbell or to my thermostat really doesn't add much to the package overall. In fact, when you look at what I would consider to be an advanced technology like Apple's HomeKit, they still require you to use 2.4 gigahertz on everything. And when you look at the recommendations of a lot of advanced Wi-Fi professionals about turning off low data rates and removing old obsolete clients that slow down your network, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do that when I'm also playing the game of trying to buy the cheapest rock bottom security camera that I can. And the only way to get the pricing down on that is to, in fact, include older radio technology. It's hard for you to be able to get those devices to implement 5 gigahertz spectrum that we've had for a number of years, going almost all the way back to the beginning, I think it's going to be practically impossible for them to implement Wi-Fi 6E radios in those IoT devices unless there's some kind of large industrial IoT implementation like a milling machine or some kind of medical equipment. And even then, you're going to have to ratify and be approved to work in those kind of hazardous environments or those clean room environments. And that's a process that takes a long time and a lot of investment. The other issue that we run into is the fact that Wi-Fi 6E, as it stands today, as of this recording in mid 2021, is still not a technology that is very effective to be used outside of the office. In some recent interviews that I've had with access point manufacturers, I've asked the question, given the shift that we've seen to working from anywhere or not working in an enterprise office, how do you see this creating a driver for the adoption of Wi-Fi 6E? And the answers that I got were a lot of shrugged shoulders and a lot of focus on the fact that these APs are really still meant to be installed in an enterprise location, whether it's a hospital or a stadium or some kind of a regulated environment. Working from home or working from a coffee shop doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to be working on Wi-Fi 6E because the investment in order to move to that new hardware is pretty substantial. Even though most access point manufacturers are trying to make the Wi-Fi 6 technology that they've been building for the last year and the new Wi-Fi 6E technology that they're currently working on equivalent or roughly equivalent in price. The hope is that they can sell enough of these 6E access points to effectively create extra value by turning it on when the customer starts deploying 6E capable clients. And that's the other issue. There aren't very many 6E capable clients out there right now. Yes, there are add-in cards that you can put on your MacBook or your Windows laptop, but most people aren't working off of those devices anymore. They're using tablets and smartphones. They're using the available technology that they have to interface with applications. And that means until those devices are refreshed, maybe later this year in 2021, but possibly and realistically speaking, not until late 2022 or even 2023, having all of that radio space available and nothing to use it is really just not going to be a satisfactory condition for most people. Why would I spend more to buy something I can't use, except maybe down the line, when I can maybe negotiate a discount off of the stuff that I know I can use today, and then we can kick that can 3 or 4 more years down the road? If companies are going to have flexible hybrid work requirements and they want to deploy Wi-Fi 6E APs, they're going to have to look at what that cost structure is going to look like for their organization. Doing a site survey on a building that has stud walls and sheetrock and multiple floors is relatively easy. Doing individual site surveys for every hostile RF environment at everyone's home is a much different proposition. And I think that's either going to drive companies to say, you provide your own Wi Fi equipment and we'll provide the software needed to connect to our organization or to our cloud, rather than saying, we're going to outfit you with the latest and greatest gear that you may not even be able to take advantage of right now. So if you've seen the parallels between Wi-Fi 6E and IPv6 as the compelling use cases shrink and adoption of the technology shrinks along with it, you're not alone. I've said for years that IPv6 will not be fully adopted by all people until there is a super compelling use case for it. I had mused about the possibility of, say, a company like Netflix only offering 4K movies over IPv6. And that was years ago, and we never got there because customer demand said, give me what I want in the way that it makes the most sense for me to connect to it. Wi Fi 6E is just a sticker. Nobody really cares about it as much as we might hope that they do, because again, it's technologically superior and elegant and pretty and completely useless right now. Until someone creates a killer app that has a need for 6E, or until our spectrum is so overloaded that there's no way that any of our new IoT devices in our home can connect to it, or until a regulatory body starts shutting off these spectrums, we're not going to see a mass scale move. We might see people who are implementing technology in that spectrum band, but when you consider that that's what we wanted to do with 5 gigahertz when we released 802.11 AC, also known as Wi Fi 5, and did not create a corresponding 2.4 gigahertz standard for it, I think you can see we're never going to really be able to get rid of these legacy devices, no matter how much we might want to. I hope that Wi Fi is able to solve these problems. And the reason why is because Wi Fi isn't just fighting a standards war or a spectrum war, they're fighting a technology war. And anyone who's ever heard the musing that 5G networking will replace Wi Fi or at least supplant it as the primary technology form knows what I'm talking about. 5G is, for more or less, a standard. Now, there are different ways to achieve high speeds with it, but it is effectively ubiquitous. The providers that we use for our mobile devices, such as AT&T and Verizon and many of the ones overseas, have already enabled it. And the overseas component cannot be understated enough, because currently 6 gigahertz is only available to US companies. If you try to buy an 802.11ax 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi 6E AP and you're not living in the United States, you legally can't even purchase it. 5G, on the other hand, is fairly well deployed everywhere, and there are a lot of companies that are effectively underwriting the deployment of the technology. And there are a lot of reasons that that is the case. But if I'm a company that's trying to make a decision between enabling my workers to use a standard that everybody supports and it's available everywhere, and some new, slightly superior technology that I'm going to have to spend more time managing and configuring and installing extra hardware to utilize, I think I'm going to go with the lowest common denominator and just tell people to deal with it. Wi Fi 6E needs some kind of killer use case. It needs something so compelling that we can't ignore it. And I've said this for IPv6 for a number of years, and unfortunately, we never got there. I'm not saying that IPv6 is dead. I'm not saying that Wi Fi 6E is on the road to being dead. I'm just saying You need to see the signs around you before you realize that you're supporting a technology that may never make it. There are a lot of great resources out there to learn more about these technologies. One of my favorites when it comes to IPv6 is the IPv6 Buzz podcast from the Packet Pushers Network. The hosts there do a great job of making IPv6 a more practical technology for you to learn about. And I'm sure when they watch this episode, they're going to have some comments about my perspective on IPv6. So I look forward to their points of view. There are also a lot of great wireless podcasts out there that talk about Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, and all the great technologies. And we'll make sure to link a few of those in the show notes. We'll be back next month with another great episode of Tomversations. We'll have more great technology topics for you to consume. You can also check out our website at gestaltit.com, where we have a lot of great perspectives on emerging technologies and existing enterprise technologies that practitioners definitely want to pay attention to. I'll be back with another episode of Tomversations very soon, and until then, thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.